1,447 hours. Strait of Hormuz. The USS Vinson, a $1.2 billion Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, is broadcasting a distress call. Engine failure, dead in the water, requesting assistance. It is the most expensive fishing lure in naval history. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Naval Command received the signal and did exactly what the US Navy had spent 3 weeks engineering them to do. They ordered the swarm. To understand what came next, you need to understand what was already in motion before a single Iranian engine turned over. The crisis had been building since November 2025, when the IRGC test fired the Fatah, two anti-ship ballistic missile, into the eastern approach of the Strait of Hormuz. Not at a target, but close enough to one that Lloyd's of London suspended underwriting for vessels transiting the strait within 24 hours of the test. The effect on shipping was immediate. A 90-kilometer queue of oil tankers accumulated at the mouth of the strait within 72 hours. Their operators unwilling to transit without insurance coverage and unwilling to pay the war risk premiums that had instantly doubled. 21% of the world's daily seaborne oil supply was sitting in a holding pattern. By December 15th, Houthi strikes on Saudi petroleum infrastructure pushed crude above $120 per barrel. President Trump issued a formal ultimatum: free the tankers, resume air transit, or face consequences. Tehran's answer, delivered on December 18th, was to seize the MV Atlantic Sovereign using a fabricated distress signal, towing the container vessel into Bandar Abbas harbor under the cover of Iran's coastal air defense batteries. The message was unambiguous: we will hold commercial shipping as leverage, and we will do it from behind a defensive umbrella. You cannot strike without escalating to open war. The USS Vinson was ordered into the Strait of Hormuz on December 20th at 14:30 hours. Its mission was not to patrol, its mission was to be seen. 43 minutes after the Vinson entered the strait, 3 Shahid Soleimani-class fast attack corvettes cut across its bow at weapons-hot speed. The Vinson's captain broadcast the distress call at 14:47. Engine failure, dead in the water, requesting assistance. The transmission went out on the International Maritime Distress Frequency, monitored by every vessel and coastal station in the Persian Gulf. Inside the IRGC Naval Command Center, the Gadir over-the-horizon radar painted the Vinson's position. Isolated, 115 nautical miles from its nearest carrier escort, apparently immobilized. The commanders ran the calculation: a lone destroyer, unable to maneuver, surrounded. This was the propaganda image the IRGC had been trying to generate for 2 years. Proof that the US Navy could be cornered in waters Tehran considered its strategic domain. They ordered every available fast attack craft at Bandar Abbas to sea. What happened at 1455 hours, 8 minutes after the distress call, was not visible on any Iranian sensor. The National Security Agency and Navy Cyber Command jointly activated a navigation spoofing package that inserted a false contact into Iranian coastal surveillance systems. A Suezmax-class supertanker, apparently drifting without power, 80 kilometers offshore in the central strait. The false contact was built from real AIS data stripped from an actual vessel transiting the Red Sea and rebroadcast through a spoofing relay, with the positional data altered to place it exactly where the deception planners needed it. The IRGC commanders saw a bonus target appear on their screens at the precise moment their fast attack fleet was staging for the Vinson intercept. A disabled supertanker, a billion-dollar seizure opportunity, international headlines, oil leverage that would make the Hormuz blockade look modest. They didn't just send the swarm toward the Vinson, they committed everything. The Bavar 373 surface-to-air missile batteries at Bandar Abbas were repositioned to extend their defensive coverage over the tanker's apparent location. The Fatah missile batteries were brought to full readiness. Fast attack craft that had been dispersed in cove and inlet positions along the Makran coast began converging on the strait. Iran's IRGC naval commanders believed they were orchestrating the defining operation of their careers. They had arranged their assets into a targeting solution someone else had designed. 15:05 hours. Lincoln Strike Group Combat Information Center, 40 miles west of the Strait of Hormuz. The strike authorization came through the chain at 15:03. By 15:05, the Aegis combat system aboard 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers had already computed the fire sequencing. The first salvo was 20 Tomahawk Block 5 land attack cruise missiles targeted against the pier and berth infrastructure at Bandar Abbas, where the IRGC fast attack fleet had staged for departure. The Tomahawk Block 5 carries 450 kilograms of blast fragmentation warhead and is guided by GPS with inertial backup, with terminal updates available from overhead sensor platforms throughout its flight. Against vessels packed hull to hull in a crowded harbor, the dispersion pattern from a 20-round salvo across 3 pier complexes produces an overlap geometry that leaves no statistical safe space within the target zone. The first round impacted at 15:05 hours and 14 seconds. The secondary explosions from fuel bunkers and ammunition stowage in the fast attack craft were visible to the MQ-9B Sea Guardian UAV, holding its orbit at 28,000 feet, and were logged continuously by its electro-optical sensors. Pier 1's fuel infrastructure produced a sustained burn column that the Phoenix RQ-4D drone, orbiting at 51,000 feet, could resolve against the coastline from its sensor altitude. The second salvo followed at a 12-second interval. 12 Tomahawk Block 5B rounds with joint multi-effects warheads, a penetrating variant specifically designed for hardened electronics and air defense infrastructure, targeted the 4 Bavar 373 battery positions that had repositioned to cover the false tanker contact. 3 rounds per battery. The Bavar 373 is Iran's most capable indigenous surface-to-air missile system, reverse-engineered from Russian S-300 components and refined over 15 years of development. Against an incoming supersonic target with terminal maneuvering, it presents a genuine intercept capability. Against a subsonic cruise missile arriving from 3 separate vectors simultaneously, the engagement sequence is computationally saturated before the third round arrives. EA-18G. Growlers from the Lincoln's air wing had been airborne since 1445 hours, holding positions outside the Bavar 373's known engagement envelope. At 15:05, they activated their next-generation jammer pods and directed focused electronic attack against the Gadir over-the-horizon radar's specific operating frequencies. The Gadir was Iran's primary long-range maritime surveillance asset, the system that had been feeding track data to the fast attack fleet commanders in real time. Its screens went to static in under 4 seconds of sustained jamming. The fast attack fleet now had no coherent radar picture of the operational area. They were navigating on last known data. Then the long-range hypersonic weapon, the Dark Eagle, system engaged. 5 rounds, launched from forward-deployed ground positions, arrived at Bandar Abbas at Mach 5+ on terminal trajectories. The Imam Khamenei hardened missile storage and command complex beneath Bandar Abbas had been designed to survive conventional air attack. Reinforced concrete ceilings at 25-meter depth, redundant ventilation and power systems, blast-rated access tunnels. Against cruise missiles and iron bombs, the design parameters were adequate. Against a hypersonic penetrating warhead arriving at Mach 5, the physics of concrete resistance at that impact velocity are different in kind, not just degree. 3 rounds penetrated to the command node level before detonating. 2 impacted the above-ground fuel storage depot that supplied the complex, igniting approximately 6,000 tons of stored propellant in a sustained fire that propagated into the adjacent missile maintenance facility. The above-ground portion of Bandar Abbas's IRGC naval infrastructure had been functionally neutralized in 45 seconds. What the Lincoln Strike Group's Combat Information Center registered at 15:07 hours was not triumph. It was the opening of the second phase. The fast attack craft that had been clustered at Bandar Abbas were, in substantial part, decoys, older hulls, minimal crews, remotely controllable. The IRGC had understood that a concentrated staging operation at a known naval facility during a period of extreme tension presented a targeting opportunity they could exploit rather than avoid. By offering the U.S. Navy a clustered target that appeared irresistible, they had incentivized a strike sequence that committed the Lincoln's Tomahawk inventory against a partially real, partially fabricated target set. The actual combat-ready fast attack fleet had dispersed into cove positions along the Makran coast and into civilian traffic patterns in the straight hours before the USS Vinson entered the picture. At 15:07, they moved. 80 Fatah 110 derivative ballistic missiles launched from mobile transporter erector launchers in the Zagros foothills. These systems had survived the Bandar Abbas strike because they were never at Bandar Abbas. They had been dispersed to pre-surveyed launch points 200 kilometers inland weeks before the crisis reached its current temperature. They were not in the Gadir's last known data picture because the Gadir was already down. The launch detection came from the Phoenix UAV's infrared sensors at 15:07:31, and the track data was in the Aegis system's fire control queue within 4 seconds. Simultaneously, Iranian cyber units flooded the Link 16 network with spoofed track data, false contacts generated from captured U.S. electronic warfare signatures designed to insert phantom targets into the Aegis combat system's threat picture and force it to allocate interceptors against non-existent inbounds. The sophistication of this attack was genuine, The spoofed tracks carried the correct IFF response codes, the correct flight profile parameters, and were timed to arrive on the displays coincident with the real ballistic launch detections, creating a classification problem that required the Aegis Baseline 10 system to run discrimination algorithms rather than simply allocating against everything flagged hostile. 12 seconds of processing time. The discrimination algorithm resolved the spoofed tracks from the real ones based on orbital mechanics. A ballistic missile follows a computable trajectory governed by gravity and aerodynamics. The spoofed contacts did not. Their velocity vectors were inconsistent with any physical propulsion system, a tell that the network's anomaly detection flagged and routed to the classification override. 32 SM-6 and SM-2 Block 3 missiles cleared their launch cells across the destroyer screen in a sequence salvo that addressed the confirmed real tracks. 40 of the 80 inbound ballistic rounds were intercepted in the upper atmosphere. 12 survived the intercept layer and entered the terminal phase, sea-skimming at 10-meter altitude on their final approach vectors to the Lincoln. The rolling airframe missile launchers on the carrier's sponson positions engaged and destroyed 10 of the 12. The Phalanx close-in weapon systems on the carrier and its nearest escorts addressed the remaining 2. One was destroyed at 3,800 meters. On impact with the water produced a shock on impact with the water produced a shock wave that was felt throughout the ship and caused no structural damage. The Abraham Lincoln was untouched. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye Airborne Early Warning Aircraft that had been orbiting at 25,000 feet throughout the engagement had maintained continuous track on the fast attack craft emerging from their Makran coast concealment positions. At 1509, 12F/A, 18E, Super Hornets, and 4 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters were already inbound on the dispersed swarm positions. The Super Hornets carried joint standoff weapons and Hellfire derivatives. The Seahawks carried Mark 54 torpedoes and AGM-119 Penguin missiles for surface targets. The engagement of the dispersed fast attack fleet took 11 minutes. 100% of the identified combat-capable craft were destroyed. 0 aircraft were lost. The battle damage assessment, compiled from the Phoenix UAV's continuous imagery and processed through the strike group's intelligence fusion cell, produced a picture that NATO intelligence services and the Gulf Cooperation Council were reviewing within 2 hours of the engagement's conclusion. Bandar Abbas Sewage RGC naval infrastructure, 100% destroyed or rendered non-operational. Bavar 373 air defense batteries, all 4 destroyed. Gadir over-the-horizon radar, offline, physical damage assessment pending. Imam Khamenei underground complex, 3 of 5 known command nodes assessed destroyed, 2 assessed heavily damaged. IRGC fast attack fleet, dispersed element 100% neutralized. IRGC ballistic missile inventory committed to the strike, 80 rounds expended, 40 intercepted, 40 impacting or near missing without hull damage. Assessment of total IRGC ballistic missile inventory affected, approximately 38 to 42%. The economic effect was measurable within 18 hours. Crude oil futures dropped $31 per barrel on the open of Asian markets as transit insurance was reinstated for Hormuz-bound vessels and the tanker queue began moving. The $2.5 trillion in annual trade that flows through the strait resumed normal cadence within 48 hours. The strategic lessons from this engagement pull in directions that are uncomfortable on both sides. For Iran, the deception architecture, the clustered decoy fleet at Bandar Abbas, the false tanker contact, the dispersed real combat fleet was not ineffective. It forced the Lincoln Strike Group to commit substantial Tomahawk inventory against a partially fabricated target set, and it delivered 40 ballistic missile impacts into the defensive engagement zone before the intercept layer cleared them. One of those rounds came within 6 meters of an aircraft carrier. In a parallel universe where the Fatah 110 guidance had not been degraded by jamming, or where one additional round had been in flight that the Phalanx did not resolve in time, the engagement record looks different. The IRGC's swarm doctrine was not proven obsolete. It was proven insufficient at its current scale and technology level. For the United States, the engagement validated the multi-domain kill chain architecture, from detection through intercept through strike to battle damage assessment, executing it with 0 platform losses in an engagement that its adversary had spent considerable effort designing as a trap. The Aegis Baseline 10 discrimination algorithm's performance against the spoofed track injection was the technical detail that received the least public discussion and arguably represented the most significant validation of the engagement. An adversary with U.S. electronic signature intelligence attempted a cyber insertion into the fire control network, and the network resolved it in 12 seconds. The Strait of Hormuz remains open. The MV Atlantic Sovereign was recovered by U.S. Navy boarding teams within 36 hours. Its crew was unharmed. Here is the question this engagement leaves genuinely unresolved. The IRGC committed approximately 40% of its total ballistic missile inventory to this strike, and the intercept layer stopped 50% of what was launched. That exchange rate, 40% of an adversary's strategic deterrent expended for 0 platform losses and 0 hull damage, looks definitively favorable to the United States. But the interceptor expenditure from the destroyer screen was also substantial, and the SM-6 and SM-2 production rate, measured against the scenario of a second Iranian salvo launched 72 hours later, before the VLS cells could be resupplied, presents a logistics problem that the engagement record does not resolve. At what point does the attrition economics of ballistic missile intercept favor the launcher over the defender? And how does the U.S. Navy's current replenishment architecture address the scenario of sustained high-tempo ballistic missile defense without port access? Leave your assessment below.